Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Jennifer Laewetz, although on social media you would know her as Jennifer Elle. Jennifer is a policy analyst and communications professional from northern Saskatchewan who works for Warshield, an Indigenous-owned and led consulting firm. She is Cree and a member of the George Gordon First Nation and an advocate for self-determination and Indigenous policy across Canada. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us this week on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as we mentioned in the intro, you're very passionate about politics, and you were in Ottawa for the Assembly of First Nations Special Assembly and the selection of Cindy Woodhouse a little over a week ago now as the next national chief. What are your thoughts on the outcome of that election?
I think it was a very interesting election. I definitely thought there would be more of a mandate for the national chief. I thought, our nations are kind of in a place where they know what they want, and I didn't think we would go through so many ballots to ultimately get to the result that we did. So,
yeah, 6 rounds and still needed a concession from candidate David Pratt, even though Cindy Woodhouse led the whole way, but at no point did she have really more than 50% of the votes cast. Do you think this is still a divided assembly?
I do a little bit, just because not reaching that 60% tells us that there's still quite the divide on where people are at with what they wanted out of leadership. I will say that I do give kudos to David Pratt for doing the graceful thing and for conceding, but I am proud of him nonetheless for waiting it out and going through all the ballots that he did.
What do you see as some of the challenges for the AFN? And it's been a challenging couple of years for the AFN. What do you see as the challenges moving forward now with a new national chief?
I think there's 3 big challenges. I think one of the biggest is going to be that unity component, which Cindy Woodhouse did talk a little bit about in her platform. I think the second is going to be drawing those fine lines between where the national chief is at and relationships with the federal government, because there's been pushback from nations thinking that AFN is taking too much of a friendly approach with the federal government and the decisions that they're making. And then I would have to say that the third would be that forensic audit, because I didn't see a whole lot of that being talked about at the AFN election in the speeches or in the platforms. So where that's going to be in terms of where the national chief takes it is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it seemed as though it was kind of pushed off to the side, and there was talk it was going to be $10 million or something, take too long and cost too much money. You work directly with First Nations. Do you think that there's an appetite for this forensic audit out there?
I think there's an appetite, but I also think that nations are advancing to the point where they're becoming so self-sufficient on their own, like we've seen with Whitecap outside of Saskatoon now removing themselves from the Indian Act. I think there's now those conversations amongst nations on what they can do to get to the point of being able to advocate for themselves and not necessarily not need AFN, but just be able to advocate for themselves. So I don't know if there's as much of an appetite for a forensic audit as, some politicos might think. I know that some want accountability, but at the same time, are they concerning themselves with all of their energy with what the AFN is doing is a whole separate conversation.
You mentioned one of the criticisms that's certainly been around in recent years, and that's that the AFN has been perhaps too closely tied to the Liberal Party of Canada. Is that a concern you would think is valid?
I think that is absolutely a valid concern. I actually just saw the other night that Cindy Woodhouse had went to the Conservative Party Christmas party. And, even as Indigenous people, some of us get on our own political camps if we choose to participate. And some people might not see the big deal with people at that national level aligning themselves in political camps. But when I look at the AFN, I look at them as the champions of our sovereignty. And although I'm involved in politics, that is the one organization that I hope, number one, champions sovereignty and also has the ability to push back on the federal government where necessary. But then again, having those relationships with those political parties and whether or not the Liberal government is outgoing and Conservative Party is incoming, I can see why they're trying to build those relationships. But keeping that fine line is necessary.
Of course, there is also the age-old questions about the relevancy of the AFN and who it represents. Do you feel that the AFN is still relevant?
Somewhat. I think that there's points where it is necessary to have that overhead umbrella, almost representing nations on a national stage, because they differ so much. You know, I live in northern Saskatchewan. Half of my family is from Montreal Lake. The other half is from George Gordon. Those two nations are going to be completely separate from one another and what they want. So having that collective body in Ottawa that is able to represent nations as a whole is necessary. But if they're able to do it effectively, is a different question.
Yeah, you point out a pretty good point there at how difficult it is to represent everybody. As someone who works with First Nations, as we said, what are you hearing some of the priorities should be, though, for this AFN moving forward?
Child welfare is a big one. That's Bill C-92 has been ongoing for work with nations. I know in Saskatchewan, some of our southern nations are spearheading and changing the game when it comes to child welfare. So seeing those conversations happen at a national level is a priority. Another thing is that First Nations policing. We haven't seen that legislation introduced yet, but I know that AFN was supposed to be closely tied with the work that was done to formulate that legislation. So First Nations policing, the addictions crisis as well on nations, and ensuring that we're holding the government accountable, you know, through their budget. We didn't see a whole lot of promises for on community strategies for methamphetamine and opioids and things like that. So that's a priority as well. And then, yeah, the child welfare stuff for sure.
Yeah, a lot of the candidates while running kept bringing up, you know, mental health and drug addictions, things like that. And then when everybody got to Ottawa, you didn't really hear much about that afterwards. Well, while you were in Ottawa, you also had the chance to meet with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. How did that come to be?
I posted on Twitter. We, as a firm, we reached out to Jagmeet Singh as well, but he was, I believe, out of Ottawa for the week. His office had said he had other commitments. For Pierre, I thought, what better way than just post a tweet and see what happens? And his team responded almost immediately. And at the time, I was like, is he actually going to meet with me or will I be canceled on? And nope, his team followed up right until the day that it happened. And yeah, so it started through Twitter and that's how it came to be.
Lucky you, because we reach out to their office all the time and never hear back from them. Why was it important for you to meet with them?
I think because now I don't want to say I wasn't politically involved in the past, but I would say in the Harper years, I was completely like non-involved. I just knew that Harper did a lot of things that I wasn't a fan of. And I wanted to make sure that some of those issues that I saw under the conservative Harper era were things that I was now advocating for if there is an incoming conservative government. So some of those things like the Job and Growth Act and not consulting properly. I tried to write a consultation policy with another EDA for the Conservative Convention, but we weren't organized enough to get it where it needed to go. So I was like, what better way than to just get in front of Pierre Poilievre and tell him, hey, consultation is important. And whether or not he listens is another story, but at least I tried. So.
Well, of course, this has led to some wondering if you are going to run in the next federal election, which could be coming sooner than later. Are you thinking of running?
The answer is no. I get that is probably my number one most asked question on every single platform I have. But right now, my work is on nations, and I truly feel like I have a lot of work to do. And I, went to school for nearly a decade, and I'm a kid that grew up with a non-traditional life. And if there's any way that I can give back, that's through the nations right now. Not to say that I don't know where the future holds, but right now, that's not my priority.
Well, we're going to talk about the possibility of a federal election and much, much more here on Face to Face with Jennifer Laewetz. We just need to step aside for a quick break. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is policy analyst Jennifer Laewetz. And before the break, we're talking about the possibility or lack thereof of you running in the next federal election. But, the House is breaking here today for the winter break. Do you feel like there is a federal election looming, though?
I think it's definitely a possibility not to write off a potential spring or fall election, for sure.
If current polling were to be believed, the Liberals would be tossed from government. What do you think that might mean for Indigenous peoples?
Oh, see, that's the thing with elections is everybody wants one, but when it comes to nations with the current work that they're doing with the federal government, it would essentially anything on the order paper would die. And right now we just saw water legislation introduced this week. And where would that go if we're in the middle of, debates and votes and all of a sudden it just dies on the order paper and we no longer get to hear about it because an election is called. So
like what hasn't been called, but you mentioned he had some concerns back in the Harper era. How would you describe the Trudeau era so far for Indigenous peoples?
I would say that we heard a lot more talking about Indigenous issues. We heard a lot more talked about reconciliation and things like that. We saw the bureaucracy ballooned in 2017 with those two Indigenous departments. However, we're still seeing and hearing those same concerns. We're not being consulted properly. This is not working effectively. This is happening. And there's been a lot of big promises, but I also think that the Liberal government has bit off more than they can chew in areas of like not water legislation, but the boil water advisories and stuff like that. And I do think that there's been more of an appetite to at least try than there was under the Harper years.
There is this perception, I think, that Indigenous peoples who vote only vote Liberal or NDP. There was a lot made of the Indigenous vote in 2015 pushing Trudeau into power. Is that something that you hear, though? What are your thoughts that Indigenous peoples only vote red or orange?
I think it's actually really interesting because it was a concept that I also didn't understand. Getting involved in politics as large as I have, is the internet and real life are two separate places when it comes to the conversation around the Indigenous vote. And even my meeting with Pierre Poilievre, I was talking to some of the chiefs that I was with at AFN. I'm like, yeah, I'm meeting with Pierre today. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Like, how did you do that? And they're like, ask me questions. But if you post that online, you're going to get someone from an urban center in Toronto being like, wow, you're a sellout. Like, it's a completely different conversation. But I will say the NDP has done a lot of strides when it comes to Indigenous people. So I know that the NDP and Jagmeet Singh do have those relationships out here in Saskatchewan.
Well, how do you view, I guess, we're going to get into some of the reactions that you get online, but how do you view the relationship between First Nations and the federal government?
I don't think that relationship is as open as people think it is. Like, I think a lot of people maybe that are non-Indigenous or don't understand the relationships with nations. Again, when we talked about that being like stewards of their own destinies and that, getting to the point of being able to advance their own interests and, become separate from the government. I think that's the main goal now. I think relying heavily on the government and really trying to formulate those relationships isn't as much of a priority when we look at economic development and getting to the place where, needing to be best friends with the federal government is no longer necessary.
Well, as we mentioned, you have a pretty significant following on social media, TikTok and Twitter in particular. What's it like? What is it about social media that you like?
For me, it's being able to reach people. I think there was definitely a need for Indigenous people involved in, westernized politics outside of our sovereignty that participate and making those inroads for people to feel comfortable existing, and I kind of look at myself as sometimes like I look around and I'm like, there's not many of us that are, taking federal politics on just by the horns and just driving through it. And it's not to say it's not tough some days because it is, but I feel that it's necessary to have those platforms.
I saw you do one interview where you were talking about people telling you were too old for TikTok or something like that, but that you do it to, to get the youth involved in politics. Can you tell us about the importance of that?
Yeah, people know that I've been advocating for the youth vote for a very long time. That 18 to 35 age range is significantly lower if you look at Stats Canada compared to people 65 and plus that are voting. So getting those youth enticed to vote, but making them understand politics. So my TikTok's a little bit different than my Twitter. Twitter, I kind of just tweet whatever and then I walk away. TikTok is very much so where I kind of do different series, like what's going on in Canadian politics, and I'll talk about what happened that day. So that people kind of have an understanding of what's going on and how things work, because there's a lot of youth out there that are like, okay, what is an EDA? And what do you mean? What's a nomination? They're not paying attention to things like that. So building those bridges and getting those youth interested, to me, is important.
Well, I don't know about TikTok, but on Twitter, the flip side of all of this is the vitriol that comes from that, especially for someone like yourself, who I think it's fair to say leans to the right a little. What's that like for you to get all that type of reaction and backlash for some of your opinions?
I used to wear it when I first started. I used to take it very personally because I'm somebody that is very conscious of how people feel about me and the actions and what that's making other people feel like. But at the same time, I had a conversation with Jody Wilson-Raybould because we were at the same event this summer, and she actually wrote in my book, like, keep doing what you're doing, and your voice is so important. And if I have to be the one that, builds those bridges and opens that roadway up for other people to feel comfortable being in their own skin and existing politically, then I'll do that. TikTok's a little bit of a different place. I feel that when people can hear me and see me speaking in such a calm way, I don't get the vitriol that I do on a place like Twitter. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm just a regular person that has to exist in this country and in this space. So I'm going to advocate for my needs as well.
How do you, has any of the harassment or anything that you've received ever made you want to just stop speaking out?
There has. There's a lot that I don't publicize because, I go back to my teachings on the energy that I bring around myself and my family. But I would be lying if I said that there hasn't been messages or comments where I have not amplified them because they have been, threatening or just really gross. And that's tough for sure. But at the same time, it's all the positive comments, especially if you go look at my TikTok, it's flooded with positive comments. And that's what I really try to pay attention to.
How much reaction do you get or surprise from people that, or anger, I guess, that you're an Indigenous person that doesn't back Trudeau and the Liberal Party?
I think like from the Indigenous camp, I don't think ever have I had someone that I know of that's been Indigenous ever push back on me or tell me, you're making a mistake for speaking out or you're doing this, you're doing that. Most of the negative reaction I get comes from anonymous accounts or people where I can go to their profile and see they live in Toronto and they're just like an urban dweller. And it's like, okay, at the same time, I'm out here in northern Saskatchewan trying to exist and live my life. So I weigh it accordingly for sure.
Did you want to talk about the Pierre Poilievre WestJet video? What was that like, your mentions when you put that up?
I muted the conversation because, funny story, there is this really weird misconception, I think, on social media that I am high up with the party, which a TikToker with a big account did say, not high up with the party, never met Pierre before. So for me to put that video up, I'm like, I think I just ruined everything for him because he's up in the polls and I just put this video and he looks terrible in it because everyone's mad about it. But I was on my flight, got home at 2:30 in the morning, checked my notifications the next day, and a family member was like, hey, I saw you quoted in a CTV News article because you're fighting with Jan Arden. And I'm like, I really didn't think that, I don't know, I wasn't thinking, I guess, and I just saw him speaking. I'm like, oh, that never happens every day, and I posted it, and it went a little bit wild, so.
Yeah, social media is a wild place. Jennifer, more to talk about here. We do just have to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation with Jennifer Laewetz here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is policy analyst Jennifer Laewetz. Jennifer, what's behind your passion for politics?
I think just getting involved, being at those tables and having those conversations and feeling like I'm making a difference.
Was politics something that you grew up in and around?
Not at all, not even in the slightest. Have no family involved whatsoever, so everything is not self-taught because I obviously went to school, but yeah, had to learn it.
So was there a point where you realized for yourself that this was something you wanted to go to school for, get interested in policy and politics?
Yes, I actually went through the University of Saskatchewan. I went through the SUNTEP program to take my Bachelor of Education, and in my 4th year decided that I did not want to be a teacher. Took a political studies class as an elective, and loved it, and had actually a professor of mine say, you know what, if teaching isn't for you, don't be scared to chase your dreams. And that's exactly what I did. So I went directly from there into political studies and took a degree in that, and then took some proficiencies and then went on to grad school. So.
Do you want to tell us a bit about, some of the work that you do with your firm, who you work for, types of things? I guess not for confidentiality reasons, but what you can about the work you do.
Absolutely. I love any time I'm able to talk about Warshield. So we're a little bit unique in the fact we're Indigenous-owned and Indigenous-led. Our CEO, Max Finday, is also from a First Nation community in Saskatchewan, Sweetgrass First Nation. He had a brilliant idea and ran with it. And we do tons of work with nations, and we do it in a unique way where we have really good relationships with the nations that we work with. So not just coming in as a big consultation firm, but coming in with lived experience. A lot of us, when we talk about child welfare, I went through the child welfare system. It's something that I can apply my knowledge to and work on it in such a holistic and organic way. But we also do GR work, we do law work as well. So there's a lot of work underneath the umbrella of Warshield that we're really proud of.
Yeah, how important do you think it is to have these types of Indigenous-led groups out there?
I think it is absolutely necessary, especially, I've been with Warshield since last year, and seeing the work we do and the feedback that we get, there was a piece of the consultation and GR work puzzle missing, and I feel like we're filling it effectively.
Back to, I guess, your advocacy, what do you think is a way that we're going to be able to get Indigenous youth involved in politics, whether that's voting, running?
I think making it interesting. I was invited by TikTok Canada to the AFN Gala, and I know that they're really amplifying Indigenous youth and Indigenous voices and entrepreneurs and making it cool to be involved and making it interesting. Kids don't want to watch a 3-hour-long documentary anymore. So, structuring videos on TikTok that are 90 seconds long and just trying to reach those Indigenous youth is important. So.
Any ways that you're thinking of trying to get people active, as we are likely, we all pretty much think that there's going to be an election sooner than later here?
For me, it's just been making those videos on TikTok, and I'm planning to start a YouTube in the new year. I've surpassed almost 60,000 followers on TikTok, and a lot of them are like, make longer videos on YouTube. So I'm going to try to do that and stay as engaged as I possibly can.
Well, we'll look forward to those as well. Jennifer, it's great to have you on and hear your views and thoughts on everything.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That is all the time we have for today. If you have, you can find this show and any other show, of course, over on our website. That's aptnnews.ca. This show and past episodes are also available as podcasts. You can find those wherever you download your podcasts. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in to Face to Face this week. We will see you back here next week.